There was a time when these cars were everywhere. You'd see them outside homes, schools, and local shops all across Britain. Millions of families owned them. Yet today, most have completely disappeared. Some rusted away. Some were scrapped. And some were simply forgotten. How many of these do you remember? Let's find out with 10 British cars that vanished from our streets too. Number 10, Austin Cambridge. For many British families during the 1950s and early 1960s, owning an Austin Cambridge meant you'd finally made it. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't sporty. But it looked respectable. Teachers drove them. Doctors owned them. Salesmen traveled thousands of miles in them. The Cambridge became one of Britain's favorite family saloons because it offered exactly what most buyers wanted. Plenty of space, comfortable seats, a smooth ride, and a reputation for dependable everyday transport. Austin sold hundreds of thousands of them. For years, they blended into everyday British life so completely that people almost stopped noticing them. They were simply part of the scenery. Children remember sitting in the wide rear seats during family holidays. Parents remember loading the boot with luggage before heading to the seaside. Even local taxi firms often relied on them. Of course, they weren't perfect. Performance was never exciting. Some owners complained about rust appearing far too early. Others wished the engines offered a little more power on Britain's increasingly busy roads. But despite those complaints, families trusted them. Perhaps that's why so many disappeared. People used them until they simply wore out. Very few were preserved because almost nobody believed they'd ever become classics. Today, spotting an Austin Cambridge on British roads feels genuinely special. But 60 years ago, you could hardly walk down a street without seeing one. And if you think Britain forgot the Cambridge, the next car disappeared even faster. Number 9, Singer Gazelle. The Singer Gazelle always seemed to promise something slightly more sophisticated. It shared much of its engineering with Hillman models, yet Singer gave buyers extra chrome, smarter interiors, and a slightly more upmarket image. For families wanting something that looked a little more expensive than it really was, the Gazelle seemed perfect. Neighbors admired them. Owners enjoyed the comfortable seats and tidy dashboard. The car felt refined without costing Jaguar money. It quickly became popular with middle-class families across Britain. Weekend drives, shopping trips, summer holidays. The Gazelle handled them all without complaint. Yet somehow, it slowly disappeared. One reason was simple. Singer itself gradually faded away. As Roots reorganized its brands, Singer lost its identity. Buyers increasingly chose Hillmans instead. Then came rust. Like so many British cars of the era, corrosion quietly destroyed thousands of perfectly usable examples. By the late 1970s, the once common Gazelle had almost vanished from Britain's streets. Today it's remembered mainly by enthusiasts, but older motorists often smile when they see one, because it reminds them of a time when British manufacturers offered families so many different choices. And speaking of forgotten choices, the next car became famous for one reason above all else: its unbelievable reliability. Number 8, Wolseley 1500. Some cars earn attention through speed, others through style. The Wolseley 1500 earned respect by simply refusing to give up. Introduced in 1957, it looked elegant without trying too hard. Its traditional chrome grille gave it a touch of luxury, while the compact size made it easy to drive through Britain's narrow streets. Owners loved its simplicity. Mechanics understood it. Parts were easy to find. Servicing rarely became expensive. For many families, it became the dependable car that always seemed ready for another journey. Many examples stayed with the same owner for 10, sometimes even 15 years. That level of loyalty was unusual even back then. The funny thing is, because they lasted so well, people assumed they'd always be around. But they weren't. As newer front-wheel drive cars arrived during the late 1960s and 70s, the Wolseley gradually disappeared. One by one, owners traded them in. Most were scrapped rather than restored. Today, finding a clean Wolseley 1500 isn't easy at all. Which is remarkable, considering how ordinary they once seemed. Back then, they were everywhere. Today, they're almost nowhere. And the next car might surprise you even more. Because at one time, it seemed impossible to drive through Britain without seeing one parked outside somebody's house. Number 7. Triumph Herald. If there was one British car that seemed to appear on every suburban street during the 1960s, it was the Triumph Herald. From the outside, it looked stylish and modern, thanks to Italian designer Giovanni Michelotti. But it wasn't just the looks that made people buy one. The Herald was affordable, easy to maintain, and surprisingly practical for a growing family. One clever feature made it stand out. Its bonnet opened almost completely forward, giving mechanics excellent access to the engine. Owners loved that simple idea because even basic maintenance became much easier. The Herald also offered an incredibly tight turning circle. Parking in narrow British streets suddenly became far less stressful. Young couples bought them as first cars. Retired drivers appreciated their light steering. Driving instructors often chose them because they were easy to control. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Early models suffered from weak performance, especially when fully loaded. Rust eventually became another familiar problem. Still, none of that stopped the Herald becoming one of Britain's most recognizable cars. More than 500,000 were built. Yet today, finding one parked outside an ordinary British home is incredibly rare. Quick question: did anyone in your family ever own a Triumph Herald, or do you remember seeing one on your street? The next car wasn't as stylish, but it quietly became one of Britain's hardest-working family cars. Number 6. Morris Minor. Few British cars are loved quite like the Morris Minor. Introduced in 1948, it stayed in production for over 20 years. That alone tells you everything. Families trusted it. Builders used it. Postmen drove it. Small businesses depended on it every single day. The Minor became famous because it could do almost anything. Need a family car? It worked. Need a delivery van? No problem. Need a pickup? There was one for that too. Its simple mechanics meant almost every local garage knew exactly how to repair one. Spare parts were everywhere. Running costs stayed low. For many owners, the Minor simply became part of the family. Children learned to drive in them. Parents passed them down to their sons and daughters. Some stayed with the same household for decades. Naturally, age eventually caught up with them. Rust claimed thousands. Others were replaced by newer hatchbacks during the 1970s and 80s. Even so, the Morris Minor remains one of Britain's greatest motoring success stories. Whenever one appears at a classic car show today, people of every age stop and smile. Because almost everyone remembers someone who owned one. But the next car was even more common during the 1970s. And for a while, it seemed absolutely unstoppable. Number 5. Ford Cortina MK4. By the late 1970s, the Ford Cortina wasn't just popular. It was everywhere. The MK4 continued that incredible success. Walk through almost any neighborhood and you'd probably find at least one parked nearby. Families loved the spacious interior. Company drivers appreciated the reliability. Taxi firms bought them in huge numbers. Even police forces used them. The Cortina somehow appealed to almost everyone. Ford also made sure buyers had plenty of choice. Different engines. Different trim levels. Different prices. Whether you wanted basic transport or something a little smarter, there was usually a Cortina that suited your budget. Owners also knew servicing would never become a nightmare. Ford dealerships covered the country. Parts remained cheap. Mechanics understood the cars inside and out. Not everyone thought they were exciting. Some people preferred sportier rivals. Others criticized the conservative styling. But sales figures proved one thing. Britain absolutely loved the Cortina. Ironically, because so many were used every single day, very few survived. Most simply worked until they wore out. Today, seeing a MK4 Cortina on British roads feels surprisingly special. Be honest, which of these 3 cars do you think deserves to make a comeback today? Because the final 4 cars include one model that millions of Britons still remember with enormous affection, and one that almost changed Britain's entire motor industry forever. Number 4, Rover P6. Some cars became popular because they were cheap. The Rover P6 became popular because it made ordinary people feel successful. When it arrived in 1963, it looked unlike anything else on British roads. It wasn't loud or flashy. Instead, it looked modern, elegant, and quietly confident. Professionals loved it. Architects, engineers, business owners, even government officials chose the P6 because it combined comfort with genuine engineering innovation. The ride felt smooth. The cabin felt solid. And long motorway journeys suddenly became far more relaxing. One feature impressed almost everyone. The Rover P6 was one of the safest British cars of its era, using advanced engineering that many rivals simply couldn't match. It even won the very first European Car of the Year award in 1964. Owners were incredibly proud of them. Seeing a Rover P6 parked outside a house often suggested the family had done well for themselves. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Repairs could become expensive, and servicing required more attention than simpler family cars. But most owners happily accepted that trade-off. Today, however, they're rarely seen outside classic car events. Yet for many older Britons, the Rover badge still represents an era when British engineering competed with the very best. Here's a question. If you could own any Rover ever built, would you choose the P6? The next car didn't have luxury, but it offered something every family wanted. Number 3. Austin Mini. The original Mini didn't just become popular. It became a British icon. By the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s, they seemed to be everywhere. Outside schools, outside factories, outside football grounds. Even celebrities drove them. Despite its tiny size, the Mini somehow carried families, shopping, luggage, and even the family dog. That clever design amazed buyers. Fuel economy remained excellent. Parking was effortless. Running costs stayed low. Young drivers loved them. Families trusted them. Driving instructors used them. Almost every neighborhood seemed to have at least one parked nearby. The Mini also proved that small cars could be genuinely fun to drive. Its sharp handling made even ordinary journeys enjoyable. Many owners bought one expecting to replace it after a few years. Instead, they kept it for decades. Naturally, millions were eventually worn out, scrapped, or exported. Although the Mini name still exists today, the original classic Mini has become far rarer than most people realize. Yet its place in British history remains untouchable. Did your family ever own a Mini? Or was there always one parked somewhere on your street? And now, we're down to the final two. One of them became Britain's favorite first family car. The other almost defined an entire generation. Number 2, Austin Metro. When the Austin Metro arrived in 1980, Britain desperately wanted a new success story. British Leyland needed a winner. Families wanted an affordable modern hatchback. And the Metro arrived at exactly the right moment. The public loved it. It looked fresh. It was economical, easy to drive, and practical enough for everyday family life. Within a short time, Metros began appearing everywhere. Outside supermarkets, outside schools, outside football stadiums. For thousands of young couples, the Metro became their very first brand new car. Parents appreciated its low running costs. Insurance remained affordable. Fuel economy suited families trying to stretch every pound. Children who grew up during the 1980s often remember sitting in the back while their parents drove to holidays, shopping centers, or Sunday visits to grandparents. Although later reliability problems damaged its reputation, that didn't stop it becoming one of Britain's best-selling cars. Today, it's genuinely unusual to see one on the road. Most disappeared years ago. Yet mention the Austin Metro to almost any older British driver, and they'll almost always have a story to tell. But was the Metro really Britain's most common everyday car? Not quite, because one car still takes the number 1 spot. Number 1, Ford Escort Mk2. If there was one British car that truly belonged to everyone, it was the Ford Escort Mk2. During the late 1970s and well into the 1980s, it seemed impossible to walk down a British street without seeing one. In fact, some roads had 3 or 4 parked within sight of each other. The Escort succeeded because it appealed to almost everybody. Young families bought it. Builders drove it. Sales representatives spent thousands of motorway miles behind its wheel. Driving schools relied on it. Even police forces and government departments filled their fleets with escorts. That versatility made it Britain's everyday car. Ford also understood exactly what buyers wanted. The Escort was reliable, affordable, simple to repair, and available in dozens of different versions. Whether you wanted a basic commuter, a practical estate, or a sporty Mexico or RS model, there was an Escort waiting for you. Owners loved another important advantage. Almost every mechanic in Britain knew how to fix one. Need a new clutch? No problem. Engine trouble? Parts were cheap and easy to find. That gave buyers real confidence. Children growing up in Britain during the 1970s and 80s often remember sitting in the back of an Escort on family holidays, trips to the seaside, or Sunday visits to grandparents. For millions of people, it wasn't just a car. It became part of everyday life. Sadly, because they were used so heavily, most eventually disappeared through rust, accidents, or simple old age. Today, a clean Mk2 Escort has become highly collectible. Cars that were once considered completely ordinary now sell for astonishing prices. It's one of those strange twists of history. The cars people barely noticed at the time are often the ones everyone wants today. So here's our final question. Which of these cars brings back the strongest memories for you, and which ones seem to be parked outside almost every house on your street? Let us know in the comments.